Oh, we're live. Hello, everyone. Yay! Welcome to the replay of the OCD Game Changers Q&A campfire chat. Is that what we called it last time, I think? Yeah, the campfire chat with Dr. Michael Greenberg, but I'm just going to call him Michael. We're here, and this was my fault. I was so, like, it was the first night of the event. I was so flustered in the way of like hoping everything goes well. My computer went, would you like to save this? And I was like, yes. And then I think I was supposed to do a next step, and then I just closed my computer. So I completely lost the first chat that we did with Michael. And so that's why we're here. Yay. But it's always a pleasure to hang out with you anyway, because I love learning from you. So
likewise.
I'm going to have you introduce yourself, so people can kind of filter in. If you're watching, please put your questions. They will post here so we can see them. Yeah, we'll be able to see them. So if you have questions for Michael, please just go ahead and file those in. As soon as we do introductions, we'll just kick it off and answer those, as many as we can until the hour. So, Michael, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Michael Greenberg. I'm a psychologist. I specialize in OCD, and I got here to this specialty because I suffered from OCD for many years. And yeah, I think that's the basics. Yeah.
Where are you at? Where are you at? And where do you practice in?
I'm in California. The practice, which is OCD Associates, is telehealth to a bunch of different states.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to read a disclaimer for everyone. And if you can't join us right now, or if you're here and you need to leave, this will be up on our YouTube. So you do not have to worry. It will be here. You can come back and review it as many times as you want, as long as it's not compulsive. I had to put that in. Okay. Here's a disclaimer. Please note that the ideas Michael shares are for your information only and do not constitute clinical advice or establish a patient-psychologist relationship. Please also note these ideas are theories based on Michael's clinical experience, but have not been empirically proven, and that rumination-focused ERP as a whole is a new and evolving approach to ERP that has not yet been researched, and therefore, to the extent that it differs from classical ERP, it is not evidence-based. So I want to go ahead and ask you a first question before we do have a question. So I love the question that she's asking. When, or do you have an idea when you're going to get some research around the rumination-based ERP?
So the answer is not immediately. I think realistically, so I do a lot of clinical work. I see a very full caseload of patients. And I squeeze my writing in the cracks. So I don't have a lot of time that I spend on my writing. And right now my priority in terms of time is writing up the ideas that I want to share, and then formalizing the RFERP manual, which is not completely done yet. And then once I'm done with that, it'll be time to think in terms of research. I think realistically, I don't even think I'm going to have the manual totally formalized for probably another year. And because there are other pieces there that I need to flesh out and polish up and put together. And then it'll be time to turn to doing some research. So I'm thinking minimum, it's going to be a couple of years, maybe. Yeah. So it's not, I don't have a specific plan of I don't have a specific research agenda. Right now, my agenda is get the ideas out there and formalize the manual. And then once that's done, then I can turn my attention to actually doing some research.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah.
We'll get to work on that manual. I'm just messing with you. Okay, let's go. Yay!
I want to more than anyone.
If you have questions, drop them in the comment section. We're going to get to as many as we can. So let's just go. Laura, thank you. She wrote, I'd love if you talk more about the relationship between anger and OCD, as you mentioned in your last talk.
So good. Okay, my favorite topics.
It's my favorite emotion.
Well, it is my favorite emotion. My most conflicted emotion. No. Basically, I think here's the short answer. So answering this question requires taking sidebar into the psychoanalytic world. So, so I'll say what I always say when I'm talking about psychoanalytic stuff, which is that people think of psychoanalysis in terms of Freud with a cigar and the Oedipal complex, and they hypersexualize it, and they think it's very like shrouded in mystery and highly sexual. And really, psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory are, when you think of it, you should think of Mr. Rogers. You should think of somebody who's paying very close attention to your very basic human feelings, to feeling angry, to feeling scared, to feeling like little kid feelings, which are also the feelings the rest of us have, but like those types of just basic human experiences. And analytic theory thinks in terms of not just these feelings, but conflicts between these feelings. Like, what if I am angry about something, but I'm also scared to express that anger because I'm afraid of losing like a relationship? Like, let's say, for example, or it could be anything. Let's say when I don't control myself, I get punished. That would be an emotional conflict. I don't want to control myself, right? I don't want to be controlled. That makes me angry. But on the other hand, if I don't control myself, somebody punishes me or somebody shames me. Does that make sense? So when we're thinking in terms of analytic theory, we're really talking about basic human emotions and conflicts between those basic human emotions. Okay, so from an analytic perspective, and I'm quoting here from David Milan, who was a Tavistock psychiatrist around like the 70s. So he said that all obsessive compulsive disorders come from a conflict between some sort of healthy aggression, whether that's, setting boundaries or being angry at something that isn't what you want, or getting your needs met, or being angry or being controlled, a healthy anger, a healthy aggression that either can't be felt or can't be expressed because it threatens attachment, it threatens a relationship. And so from that perspective, people with OCD would in general be assumed to have some sort of, and I'm using the term anger to really mean aggression, which means, let me actually go back one more step. Okay, I know I'm getting a little bit lost in the weeds. Humans have two basic needs in relationships. They need to be together, they need to be attached, right? We need love and connection. And we also need to look out for ourselves individually. We need to get our needs met, we need to set boundaries, we need to protect ourselves. So we have a need to attach, but we also have a need to be aggressive, to meet our individual needs, to protect ourselves. Those are sort of two basic relational dynamics. And a lot of what goes on emotionally is about negotiating how we balance those two needs, which sometimes, as you can imagine, conflict with each other. Okay, so Milan said that OCD happens when somebody has some sort of an aggressive impulse. And again, we're saying aggressive like healthy, natural, not bad. Aggression is not bad in this model. That can't be felt or can't be expressed because it threatens an attachment. It threatens relation. It threatens the connection. Does that make sense? And so then that conflict gets expressed in terms of a symptom. The symptom is something that both expresses that conflict or both expresses that aggression, but also blocks it. It's this now is beyond the scope of this conversation, but basically you would see the compulsion or the symptom as emanating from that conflict between those two emotional needs. And so that's why somebody with OCD would generally have like unconscious or unexpressed healthy aggression. Conflicts around anger.
Question, and we need to do another live Instagram so we can like go back and forth, because I want to make sure that we get to everybody's questions. But like, when you say it threatens, can that also be like threatens a relationship? Can that also mean like be invalidated? So
amazing question. Okay. Amazing question. So I would think of invalidation invalidation is like an extremely, it's like shocking to me that this is not a term we were all raised with. Did Marsha Linehan like invent that term, or she just highlighted it? I don't know, but it's such an important like idea and construct in thinking about relationships and emotions. And what's interesting to me about invalidation, and I'm saying this for myself, if somebody else has already said it, I'm sorry that I'm not quoting you, but I'm saying this based on my own observations. Invalidation is interesting because it is both sides of the conflict. Invalidation is infuriating, right? It makes you angry, but it is also a threat to attachment. Feeling invalidated feels like you're losing the connection. It feels like somebody doesn't understand you. It's directly a misattunement. If attachment is about attunement and feeling connected and feeling like you see me and you understand me, then invalidation is the opposite. It's a misattunement.
Right.
And it's scary because you don't see me, you don't understand me, we're not connected in that moment, or we're not connected to a certain degree. And so invalidation is really important because it's on both sides. And so I think that when I'm working with parents of OCD kids, then invalidation, I'm looking at control and I'm looking at criticism and shame, but I'm also, because those are sort of the two sides of the conflict, right? Are you angry at being controlled? Are you threatened by being shamed or rejected? But then I'm also looking at invalidation because that is also a really important part of this picture, because that can either be a source of anger and or a source of like feeling like a lack of attachment. So invalidation is a very important thing to be thinking about in this context.
Good. Okay, so our next Instagram chat, we're starting with invalidation.
Let's do it.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Thank you for that answer. And thank you, Laura, for the question. Mason says, Greenberg is the best in the OCD field right now. I said what I said. You did, Mason, and I would not disagree.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thanks, everybody. I like you too.
Okay, how do you identify things that are off limits for analytical thinking or rumination? Do you base that off your...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do you base that off your themes or things related to your core fear?
Excellent. Okay. So the broader question here is what makes something a compulsion, right? So my definition of compulsion is that it is about the subjective lack of agency. You feel like you don't have a choice. You feel like you don't have control. And so based on that definition, anything that you want to do, anything that you are choosing to do is not a compulsion. A compulsion is something you don't want to be doing or you're conflicted about doing, but you are scared not to do it because you feel like you have to do it because you're so scared, right? It feels like you don't have a choice. Okay. So by that definition, for example, is it OCD to only eat organic food? Right? You see a lot of these questions among OCD therapists, especially new ones, who are like trying to figure out where the objective line is between OCD and not OCD. My answer is that there is no objective line. It is completely subjective. It is about your subjective sense that you are doing this from a place of agency and from a place of choice. If you want to eat organic food only, that's your choice. And that's what you want to do. God bless. That's not OCD. If you feel like you don't have a choice, you can't eat anything that's not organic because you are so scared, right? Then that would be OCD in my book. But these are my, as we said in the disclaimer, these are my opinions, not talking for anybody else. Okay, so therefore, before we start ERP, from my perspective, we first need to delineate where the compulsion is. And sometimes people are conflicted and they're not really sure where their line is. And so you have to sort of make that decision first. So for example, let's use sexual health as an example. Somebody is going to bars because they want to hook up, but then they never do it because they would never hook up with someone they just met, right? And they come in and they're like, I feel like this is me being OCD. So my question to them would be, where is your actual boundary? Because there is no objective line here. There could be someone who's comfortable doing that. There could be somebody who says, I would never do that in a million years. I needed like an STD panel and a committed relationship. Any boundary is fine. There's no objective line here. But before we start deciding what we're going to do as exposure and what we're counting as OCD, we need to sort out what you actually want, right? Which doesn't mean that's necessarily clear. It could be that you have some conflicts around that, but you have to first make a decision about where you want that line to be. Does that make sense? Okay. So anytime we're thinking about, is this compulsion or not? The question is, are you doing this because you have a choice? That's the point. It's less about, is this a compulsion, and more about, do I know that I have a choice right now? Okay. So now bringing this back to the original question, if somebody says, is this rumination? What they're really saying is this compulsion? And my answer is, it doesn't matter whether this thing is objectively rumination. What matters is that you know that you can make a choice to think about this or not think about this. And if you feel like I can't stop thinking about this, then that's what makes it a compulsion. If you know that you can turn this off or not, right? Then I'm good. So the example that I've used, and listen, some things are obviously rumination. They're obviously compulsive. They're things you're like, I don't want to think about this, but I can't stop, right? Obviously, that's obviously a compulsion, right? But other things might be, for example, I do a lot of thinking about clinical stuff. If I can't stop thinking about it when I'm in the middle of doing other things, then that's compulsive, and I need to be like, Michael, you need to make a choice, right? But if I want to be thinking about that, I would not see that as compulsive, even though it might be literally the same thought process. It's about knowing that you have control. Am I giving like way too long answers? Do you need me to like be more concise?
No, we're good. We're good. I mean, I'm coming up with like 8,000 questions to whatever you say. So, but
for next week, yeah. I'm like Christy show. Yeah.
No, this is good stuff. So, okay. All right. Next question. How do we know that we have fully learned from an experience? I find that I ruminate out of feelings of self-punishment and thinking that if I don't ruminate or punish myself, I will repeat the error.
Okay. So I'm going to take this opportunity to say that I need to be answering questions that are general questions and not individual questions, because I can't be giving like personal clinical advice. But I'm gonna highlight something from this question that I think is a general principle. Basically, this person sounds like they're saying that their ruminative process is about holding themselves responsible, and that they're afraid to stop doing it because they're afraid that if they don't do that thing, they're then going to make the same mistake in the future. Okay, so what this person is saying is basically they're afraid to stop this ruminative process, which for them involves, you know, compulsive self-reflection and making themselves feel guilty and making themselves feel like whatever. They're afraid to let go of that because they're afraid that then they'll make a mistake in the future. And so that's sort of putting it in the framework of any compulsion. You are scared to stop doing that compulsion because you're taking this risk, right? Okay. And so like any other compulsion, you would have to stop doing the compulsion and take the risk, right? And probably that would be in the context of understanding, you know, why you're doing this, where it comes from, looking at whether it serves a purpose or not, which presumably it doesn't, and then making a choice to let it go.
That's where it gets scary.
Yeah,
it's that risk. And that
I think it gets less scary when you do two things. When you look at it cognitively and you think like through the justifications for why you're doing this, and you realize that it doesn't actually serve a purpose. And I should say, if it does serve a purpose, we need to find a way to fulfill that purpose in a non-compulsive way. So for example, if somebody says, you know, I need to think about my next job, but I can't stop thinking about it all the time, I would say you need to carve out time to think about it. I wouldn't say that sometimes it's not constructive. If you're sitting there ruminating about whether you're gay, carving out time to ruminate about that is not going to do anything, right? So it's not always, if there is truly a functional component here, then that needs to be separated out so you can let go of the compulsive part, right? So I think it becomes easier to let it go when you look at whether it's serving a purpose. And also and this is where I think the analytic stuff helps, if you understand where this is coming from and that this thing that you're doing now is really shaped by earlier experiences, by earlier fears, I think seeing that what you're doing now is not really about now, it's really about past experiences, I think that also makes it easier to let it go.
Well, I think that's where the crux is, though, is if we were to carve out time for this or that, it's figuring out what you should carve it out for, right? Because it feels so urgent.
I'm so sorry. There's a literal jackhammer outside of my apartment. I don't know what to do. Should I? How bad is it? Can you hear it really loudly?
We can still hear you. It's just I was like, wow, there must be construction on his window.
Well, great timing. Okay. If it's not, I don't know how loud it is for you. If it's not bad, I can keep going. If not, I can like switch rooms with my husband in our tiny apartment. And
I think you're fine. It's just that it's probably going to make people with misophonia
crazy. I have some theories.
You know, okay, good. We'll talk about that on Instagram too. Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry I missed what you were saying because I was so distracted.
I don't remember. It's okay. It'll pop up later. Okay, so Scott says, is there an in-between space I can, okay, wait, let me read his further question. This might be getting into the therapy level, but we'll look. If I'm being honest with myself, I'm not currently able to accept on a deep level that I can't find 100% of my theme. Part of me still really thinks I can solve it. Is there an in-between space I can help to move towards further surrender?
I think what this person is saying, and again, like, well, I'll try to make it a general question. I'll try to, I'm not going to answer, I'm not, we'll try to keep it general questions, first of all, for anybody listening and asking questions. I mean, this person is saying they're ambivalent about letting go of their compulsion and they're not sure whether it serves a purpose, I think basically is what they're saying. You know, without knowing the details of the case, if somebody were coming to me and saying they were ambivalent about letting a compulsion go, I would be thinking in sort of three prongs. I'd be thinking, is there a functional piece here that needs to be addressed, right? Like, let's say somebody has health anxiety and they really do have a symptom that they're concerned about, and they really do need to go to a doctor, right? Or they want to go to a doctor. I don't see that as inherently compulsive. That's not compulsive. If they actually want to go to a doctor, go to a doctor. But ruminating about it all the time or doing things that are not actually helpful, so you have to sort out functional from not functional. Okay, that's number one. Number two is I would be looking at, you know, whether it actually does serve a purpose. So I said separating out the functional component, then looking at sort of realistically, how many times have you done this? Has it actually helped, right? And looking at sort of, you could think of it in terms of motivational interviewing. You could think of it in terms of looking at the cognitions, looking at the cognitions about this thought process and deciding like, plus it costs and benefits. Does this actually make sense, right? And then the third thing that I would be thinking about, and this is where I bring in the analytic piece, is this person is conflicted about letting go. And so I would also be looking for how this conflict about letting go here maps onto past experiences and past patterns of conflict about letting go, or whatever the specifics of this are. So I would be thinking in terms of basically functional component, costs and benefits, or cognitive, and dynamic. Like, what's the emotional conflict here? And it's sort of, and that's therapy. So I hope this person finds somebody to work with on those things.
Okay. How does one walk the tightrope of setting values-based boundaries with going down the rabbit hole of rumination, being over analytical?
So this is not a question for me because I don't believe in values-based anything. Like, I don't think that that's a part of us. That is, I do not endorse that. I do not believe in that. It has nothing.
Can you say more about that, or no?
I mean, I don't want to, like, I'm trying to not get a reputation for being the guy who like goes off every time somebody comes back. So I'm gonna like, I'm not. The most exciting part of no, I didn't go. I am composed. The most exciting part for me of the fact that you lost the recording was that I got like mad about ACT in the last recording, and I was like, this time I'm not gonna. So here I am having a totally composed conversation about it. So I don't believe that you have to be values-based to get better from OCD. I don't. I don't think that you have to do a values-based action. I don't think in terms of that, meaning we're all values-based. We all want good things. Nobody's going to bed at night thinking like, I want to be a bad person. I don't think that's not part of how I think about OCD. I don't think, it is not part about how it's not part of how I think about OCD, and I'll leave it there. For further thoughts for further details about my thoughts about ACT, there is an article on my website, and if you want to read it, go read it.
Oh, okay.
Points for behavior.
I'll put your website up.
Gold star.
If we take away the values-based thing, do you still want to answer that question or no?
It was, I think they were saying that they get ruminative about like what's values-based. Based balance going down the rabbit hole. Yeah, because I think that they're thinking about like what's values-based. You know, what's me? What do I actually, whatever. I don't think in terms of values. I think in terms of agency. I think in terms of control. I think in terms of knowing that you have a choice and that you can do X, Y, Z. A lot of times values-based, I think, is used to say, well, we can't fix your symptoms, so what do you choose to do anyway? And I don't like that because I think it is our job to fix your symptoms. I think that's the whole reason you're in treatment. I don't think that teaching someone to accept that they have symptoms and then go do the thing that they want to do anyway is treatment. I'm not saying it's like, you know, awful or that it's terrible to do something values-based, but I don't think it's a helpful way of thinking about OCD. And I don't think it should ever be an excuse for not treating the symptoms. Yeah.
My thoughts on it are this. I've always been confused about the values-based stuff because I'm going to do what I want anyway, but I still feel like shit when I do it. And I feel like when we use the term values-based, it's like all of a sudden, oh, but if I'm doing values-based things, things will feel better. And that's not the case.
Not the case. Not the case. It's also like, who needs this extra moralization? People with OCD are not like moralizing enough. You know what I mean? Like we're the people who are afraid of judgment. We're sitting there going, oh my God, am I doing it right? Like, is this whatever? So it's not, again, I'm not going to like get on a soapbox because I'm on my best behavior, but I do not endorse this way of thinking.
Interesting. Okay, great. Sophia asks, I've heard you say it's important how we speak about OCD. There's too much emphasis on OCD as chronic. Can you speak to what you think recovery goals should or can look like?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's start by saying I definitely don't use the word cure because the word cure implies that it's one and done. Like if you do this thing, then you never have to think about it for the rest of your life. But I would say that if you think of OCD as compulsion and avoidance, then to the extent that you eliminate compulsion and avoidance, you are better from OCD. So therefore, it's more like somebody who has like, I don't know, high cholesterol or whatever. And to the extent that they change their diet or whatever, I don't mean to, you can do whatever, for whatever intervention. To the extent that you do the intervention, your cholesterol will be healthy, right? And then to the extent that you stop doing it, all of a sudden you'll have problems again. Right. So we wouldn't say that your diet and exercise cured your cholesterol issues. We would say that you got better. And if you go do the other thing again, you're going to get worse again. So therefore, I wouldn't use the word cure. But I do think that, that basically, is it really bad? Should I switch? It'll take me a minute.
I'm just laughing. Just go.
Let me switch. Let me do the switch. It'll take me like a full minute to make the switch though. Should I do it? Yeah. Okay. I'll do it. Okay. Bye everybody. See you later.
Wait, are you going to come back on? Oh, okay. Well, I'll just talk.
I'm going to like turn, you don't need to see my messy apartment. I'm going to turn everything off. I'm going to make the switch and I'll be back in a minute. And I'm really sorry, but also I really had no control.
So I'll just talk for a moment until he gets back. A lot of people ask me what I think about some of what Michael says and his theories and the things that he brings to the table. I just wanted to take a moment to share with you my feelings about it. I know that there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of people in the community that don't agree with what he says and feels like, you know, some of the things that he says is kind of canceling out what we've been doing. Here's my perspective on it. And I hope that you'll hear this. As you know, I live with OCD. I have done successful ERP. It has served me very well. I think to a certain degree, it's gotten me to X spot in my recovery, a certain percentage where I'm still left with a ton of rumination. I'm still left with all this stuff. That is not the fault of my therapist, by the way, who's amazing. But there is to some degree things that I haven't been able to know how to do on a daily basis, to know how to kind of squash the rumination. When I think about what Michael is bringing to the table, when I think about what other people bring to the table for OCD therapy and new ideas, this is what we're looking at. How can we push towards 100% symptom reduction? So if I'm at 80% and Michael's viewpoint can take me to 87%, that's a win for me, and that's something that I'm going to support. So just wanted to give you an idea of kind of where I fall on being able to look at people's new ideas and the way that we can change people's lives. Okay.
And to be clear, like basically you could conceptualize everything that I'm saying in terms of ERP. I only distinguish it because I think it's different enough that it's a certain type of ERP, but it is still confronting triggers, eliminating avoidance, eliminating compulsions. Like the nuts and bolts of ERP are still there, right? It's just reconceptualizing it is similarly to how inhibitory learning reconceptualized it.
Mhm.
Inhibitory
Right.
learning reconceptualized ERP instead of habituation, they reconceptualized in terms of learning. I would say they didn't totally discard habituation. They just said they just focused on learning. I'm sort of going in the same direction, but a step further and saying I'm focusing on agency.
Right.
And I think it's important to discard habituation and not just sort of take the focus off of it, because I think it murks things up. It muddies the waters. I think that
Mhm.
it throws things off. But yeah, so I'm not coming into like devalue ERP. I'm coming
Mhm.
into like sharpen it up, hopefully. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and like add in adjunctive pieces that I don't think come at the expense of anything that we're doing. I think people think that ERP is this very um, clear approach. And anybody who has been a practitioner knows it's not clear at all. Like, even if you read, um, and like, it's really not clear. Like, just because you're
Mhm.
doing exposure, exposing to the thing that scares you, how you do it, why you do it, what you're doing as it is all very unclear. And what I'm offering is just sort of a more parsimonious, like streamlined approach that's
Mhm.
within ERP, but a very specific version of it. I'm not
Mhm.
looking to uproot anything. And ACT has only been around for a very short period of time.
Mhm.
So I don't think that should be considered like the classical treatment.
Well, and in it just from the viewpoint of where I'm at, and of course I'm not clinical or a therapist, but just in supporting people and hearing people in group, that I did not understand how I did not appreciate the habituation model until I really started meeting regularly with people with POCD. And how at the end of the day, people are not going to habituate to POCD thoughts. They're not going
I don't
to,
I
and
don't
they
believe that
shouldn't have to.
I
They
don't believe
shouldn't
that
have
habituation
to.
even, because I think that anxiety is a consequence of rumination. I think of it in terms of behavior, and you do not habituate to behavior.
Mhm.
So I don't actually believe in habituation to anxiety.
Mhm. Right.
So therefore, it's not just that I think it's hard. Like, if it worked, you can make a case for doing something painful because it would make you better. If you don't believe it works, and again, think what everybody's entitled to think what they think. This is what I think. It's my personal opinion based on personal and clinical experience, not research based. It's just me. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's real, and so I don't think it works, and therefore you get distress but no positive change.
Mhm.
I think you might along the way get some positive change, but I would say it's probably attributable to some other factor and not habituation. That's my
Mhm.
personal opinion. Okay, going back to the question that was asked, which
Yeah.
was
It
how in
pro
terms of outcomes. It's a good question. Okay, so initially
There it
when
is.
okay, perfect. So initially when I was talking about my stuff, I said, I really think I want people to aim for all the way better. And what I meant was like that there's a sort of idea that you're always going to have symptoms, and
Mhm.
that I don't like the idea that you are always going to have symptoms. I think we should be aiming for not having symptoms. Um,
Mhm.
and at the same time, saying that I think made people think that I meant you're never going to have a moment.
Mhm.
And I think everybody has moments, and honestly, even people without OCD have moments. And so, what I'm saying is that I think that people can get to a point where OCD is not a regular part of their lives, where they're definitely not chronically distressed, and hopefully usually not distressed, that this is not a thing that is a part of their lives anymore. But that's the language I used originally that I think was not helpful. When I say not a part of their lives, what I mean is not a part of their everyday lives.
Mhm.
I don't think people without OCD don't understand the degree to which when you have OCD, it's constant. It is everything. It is everything you're thinking about, every party you're thinking of going to, you're like, what's it going to be like to be there with this? Right. So I'm saying, I think we can get to a point. I know people can get to a point where that is not the case. What
Mhm.
I'm not saying is that there will never be something that comes up and scares you, and then you go into your old habits of ruminating and you have a bad moment or a bad few hours, or something brings up something that sticks around. I'm not saying those moments will never happen. But I'm saying we should get to a point where those moments are few and far between. And most importantly, that when they happen, you know what to do.
Mhm.
You know exactly what to do. And so even when they come up, you're not that scared. So
Mhm.
I also think that I'm hopeful that we can get to a point where people don't have any symptoms, where like it doesn't even come up. But I think that probably requires, a longer term, deeper, more emotionally focused approach. Um,
Mhm.
but I think that even with just the CBT, I think we can get to a point where the former point that I was talking about, where you have your moments every so often, but it is not a regular part of your life. It's not
Mhm.
a chronic part. So basically, what the upshot of everything I'm saying is that using the term chronic condition, well, it's pretty broad. What do we mean by chronic? Does chronic mean there's still going to be times when you have a moment when something scares you, however, not on a regular basis. I guess you could call that a chronic condition in the sense that like it's not totally absent from your life, right? But I think that when people say it's a chronic condition, I think that they usually mean you're going to always have symptoms
Mhm.
on a regular basis. And
Mhm.
that's just something you have to accept. And that I do not believe at all. Also, my lived experience, I mean, you can't generalize from one person and say, oh, well, I got better. And so, everybody else will too. Also, I've also done a lot of analytic work. So I don't mean to generalize for myself, but I do not think that we should be accepting the idea that OCD is going to be a regular part of your life. I think we should be
Mhm.
aiming to get people what I would consider all the way better, which means you may have a moment here and there, but this is not something that you are thinking about on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Is that a clear answer? You get what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
So what
I
do we mean by
I
chronic? Do we mean chronic like you have OCD every day and you have to cope with it, or do we mean chronic like no, you don't have OCD every day, you don't have to cope with it. Here and there, something pops up where you're like, oh shit, okay, Michael, rein it in, right? Or maybe there's a day when something's very present for you and you have to be like attention versus awareness until it goes away. So
I mean, I use the term chronic when I'm describing OCD as this is a chronic illness that requires professional help. So it
yeah,
is going to be chronic until you choose to seek help and get I mean,
in other words, you mean it's
that's
not,
just the
what you
bottom
mean
line.
is it's not going to go away on its own. I think, we can use this term in a lot of different ways, but like you're using it, I think, to mean it's not going to go away until you get help. I think
Correct.
some people, and in a similar way, using the term chronic can either convey compassion, like don't worry, this is something that you deal with, or it could convey hopelessness. You're just gonna
Correct.
be dealing with this for the rest of your life, and there's nothing we can do for you. And
Well, I see in my journey it was chronic. I almost died by suicide until I was intervened with professional help.
yeah,
And then it was, oh, this whole life opened up for me. Does that mean
mhm,
OCD is gone? No, but I'm not going down the path of getting worse and worse and worse.
yeah.
Now I have tools to manage it.
Yeah. So my hope for you and for anybody else is that they would not just have tools to manage it, but that they would get to a point where this is not a distressing part of their life on a regular basis.
Mhm.
That's, I think, the goal. Even if people aren't there yet, I don't think. Yeah. And I should add, even if even if hypothetically my ideas couldn't get us there, there's no reason to be committed to this idea of OCD as a chronic condition.
Right.
We should just be working toward. It's not like it's almost as if the idea that OCD is a chronic condition is treated as a value, like
Hmm.
like it's supposed to be a chronic condition. I mean, even if it were currently a chronic condition, which again I'm not saying necessarily it is, we should be working on working on totally better. I know this is your conversation with Stu that you've mentioned. Yeah, like I'm
Yes.
gonna spend the rest of my life working on getting people as better as humanly possible, and then hopefully other people will work on that also, and then this will be something that we know how to treat. One
It,
too.
yeah, it's the balance between assurance. I think the word chronic is the balance between assurance and hopelessness. So inside of those two, it's like, okay, now I have agency. Outside of those two, I think it's terrible.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying you want it to be something empowering.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. So
yeah.
you realize, like for me, when I heard chronic at the depths of my struggle, it was not my fault. So
Mhm.
that relieved
Right,
a lot of the shame and
right,
guilt.
right.
But then after, it's
Mhm.
the okay, it's chronic, but here are tools that and so then it's, oh, okay,
Yeah,
so I can kind of stave off the chronic piece of keeping going down this rabbit hole of disaster.
yeah. You're saying that it's chronic, we have tools to deal with it. My goal with the treatment that I'm delivering now, but also with where I hope this treatment will go, for it to not feel like it's something you have to cope with on a regular basis.
Right.
For you
Right.
to really clean up the symptoms and be a normal person,
Yeah.
who again every so often might have a moment. but like
Yeah.
largely is free. That's, I think, the goal. That's what, yeah.
All right. Well, on to the next, which I think is great. Great to follow up from this. So does the psychoanalytic piece mean that the content of your obsession says something about you?
Good.
Yay!
Yeah, good. This is what everybody's scared of. People think that psychoanalytic means you're going to go in and they're going to be like, oh, you really do want to molest children. Oh, you really do want to murder your husband. No, that is not what that means. What it
Right.
means when we're thinking, again, in terms of psychoanalytic, we're thinking in terms of your other more basic feelings you had when you were 2 and 3 years old that had nothing to do with the current symptom, and that the current symptom, basically a sort of a tenet of analytic theory, is that you have these emotional conflicts when you're little, and that these emotional conflicts get repeated. The idea that the same emotional relational conflicts get repeated is a very foundational idea. It's called the repetition compulsion, and it's a very foundational idea in analytic theory. So, for example, when somebody tells me they're having XYZ conflict with their spouse or their boss, immediately my assumption is that on some basic core level, if we can outline what the emotional conflict is here, we will see that that emotional conflict is one that has repeated itself throughout this person's life
Mhm.
and emerged originally in its original form in very early childhood. Now,
Mhm.
but first you have to sort of be able to discern what the very like sort of basic emotional pattern is. Does that make sense? It's not that,
Mhm.
right? So, for example, somebody, I'll just as one example, and this doesn't have to be true for everybody. It's very person specific, but somebody who's constantly scrutinizing themselves, am I a pedophile? Am I a pedophile? What that could be in some cases is that this is a person who is afraid that there is something shameful about them that will make them unable to be loved by other people. And that they
Mhm.
have to constantly look inside themselves, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Is there something shameful about me, etc. And so that pattern of feeling like there is something ugly about me, not that I'm saying that pedophiles are ugly, I have only 100% compassion for pedophiles, but for the person who's afraid of being a pedophile, this could be, again, this is just one example of what the emotional conflict could be. This could be someone who is scared that there is something ugly about themselves that will be revealed. And that once it is revealed, they will no longer be loved.
Mhm.
And that could be the pattern, for example. When they were little, it probably wasn't about being a pedophile. When they were little, maybe it was about something else that was deeply shameful or that they would have were afraid would lead to their rejection from their family. And
Mhm.
maybe, and then that got repeated in different forms, different versions of that conflict throughout their life. And maybe they settled on, the pedophilia as a symbol in our society. I think, probably less so now. I think now we're moving towards, I think now like cancellation is the bigger threat now. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be the next 20 years of OCD. But I
Correct.
think up until a few years ago, I think the worst, most stigmatized possible thing you could be in society was a pedophile. And
Mhm.
um, I think that for that reason, it symbolized something for a lot of people, something that would be, shameful about you that if revealed would lead to your total rejection.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why that theme could have been the thing that people settled on, but it could have emanated from a more basic fear that they had as a child. Does that make sense? Do you understand what
Mhm.
I'm saying? Yeah.
So, how does that correlate to the core fear?
So the core fear in general, 90% of the time, is the threat to attachment.
Okay.
What is the and somebody somebody okay, leave that aside. It's highly person specific. So threat to attachment might sound, oh, everybody's just afraid of being alone, but that's not nuanced enough. Everybody needs attachment and is afraid of losing attachment. But what that looks like and the flavor of that and how they were afraid of losing attachment, what the threat was to attachment when they were little. Were they afraid that dad was going to leave? Were they afraid that dad was going to die? Were they afraid that when mom got angry with them, all of a sudden it felt like she didn't love them and all of a sudden they were terrified? Right? That's a threat to
Mhm.
attachment too, even though she's there, right? Did they
Mhm.
have, somebody labile in their life? Was it the invalidation? Invalidation that when they cried, they would get invalidated and then they felt totally cut off. That
Mhm.
invalidation itself was a threat to attachment.
Mhm.
Or so this could be infinite different like personalized experiences of what the threat to attachment was feeling alone, feeling shamed, feeling rejected, feeling like you're not good enough. You can see how each of these is sort of a variation on the theme of attachment, right? So in most cases, the threat to attachment is the same thing as the core fear.
Okay.
There
Yeah.
are cases that are organized differently. The threat to attachment is always in the model, but sometimes the OCD is organized not around the threat to attachment, but around, is this beyond the scope or should I go?
We still have a few questions.
Okay, so I'll leave it there. Most of the time, the OCD is organized around the threat to attachment, and that is the core fear. In some cases, the threat to attachment is still there in the background, but the OCD isn't organized around it, and it's not the core fear.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
To be continued.
Thank you. To be continued. Okay. Do you think that people with OCD can be called neurodivergent?
This is not, I have no opinion. This is not my area. I have no idea. I don't know. Zero opinion.
Okay.
It sounds like literally, I don't know. No opinion. Okay, maybe I do have a little bit of an opinion.
Okay.
If that means that they have a different brain, then I would probably avoid that term because even though maybe I think that telling people they have an OCD brain is a way of communicating to them that like this is permanent. They're never going to get better. You know, if it, I know that there's research that, for example, people with OCD might have an overactive caudate nucleus, right? But then what if somebody walks into your office with OCD and then walks out of your office with, feeling better? Does that mean their brain changed? Right. So I don't like to think in terms of what I call neurological reductionism, like just sort of making things about brains. To the extent that that is destigmatizing and compassion encouraging, like God bless, and I don't have a problem with it. But I just wouldn't want people to think that, oh, I have this like messed up brain or different brain, and so now I'm damned to feel this way forever. Because I don't think that you're damned to feel this way forever.
Well, I don't really want to go into it, but that also like intertwines into the cancel culture piece, but we can talk about that on Instagram.
Sure.
There's a whole other, yeah. Okay. This is a great question. I still struggle with ruminating. I've been learning a lot about acceptance and was starting to believe it could help. Are you saying that acceptance is not helpful? I think this is a great question.
It depends on what the acceptance is of. So for my whole like sort of starting point is that there's a difference between a thought occurring to you or a question that exists for you and trying to answer that question or thinking about it. So for example, if a thought occurs to me, am I in the wrong relationship? Right? Or that question exists for me, am I in the wrong relationship? You might have to accept that that question exists.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when people are ruminating and they don't realize that they're ruminating, and then they're told to accept the thoughts. And what they're doing is they are accepting their thoughts, but their thoughts are rumination. And so they're doing a compulsion and they're trying to accept that they're doing a compulsion. That's bad. So that's the problem. And also, who's on their best behavior still? It's me. So, like 2 gold stars.
I know where this wants to go.
It's not going there. So as long as we're distinguishing between a thought occurring to you or a question that exists and everything that comes after, which is trying to figure it out, and we're accepting that that question exists, which bothers us, but we are refraining from engaging in trying to figure it out or rumination or directing attention towards it, that's fine. But we have to be really crystal clear about that line.
So this question, I feel like goes right along with this, and I like it. Hi, Michael. What do you think about radical acceptance versus your idea of stopping engagement? Similarities versus differences. And I'm going to tell you, I have questions. I have questions about radical acceptance too. And I think when I have talked about it in the past, I don't think I really know what it means, and I'm not sure I buy into it.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know.
Along the same lines, I should start by saying I'm not an expert on DBT. I'm not even like I have some basic knowledge of DBT, but it's not my area. And if by radical acceptance we mean accepting reality as it is and not trying to change it, right? Then accepting reality as it is might mean that this question exists for me, and not trying to change it might mean that we're not going to sit here playing with it. If that's what radical acceptance means, sign me up. If radical acceptance means accepting that I'm sitting here miserable because I'm ruminating, don't sign me up. 3 gold stars.
I think for me, the radical acceptance piece falls into that next level percentage that I just didn't have the answer for. So then it is the, okay, well, then it's just radical acceptance that this is how I am. And that feels very hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
I think that to a degree I could try to make it feel empowering, but I like the more that I'm learning, the more I don't feel like it is.
Mm-hmm. I think what we're getting at with a lot of the things that we're saying is that the same terms can be used to communicate compassion or to communicate can induce compassion or can induce hopelessness. And to the
Mm-hmm.
extent that we are talking about compassion for where you are, let's go. And to the extent that you're talking about hopelessness about where you can go, we're doing something harmful.
Right. Well, and I think this Luke just said a question. I think that's going to expand on this. If we are accepting the question or accepting the problem, even though we're not engaging, does that mean we can never get completely better? Here, I'll put it up right here so you can see it.
If you're accepting the question or accepting the problem, we're not engaging. Does that mean we can never get completely better? Does that mean maybe this person is asking, will that question always exist? So I think that's what they're at. I'm going to ask as if that's what they're asking. I'm going to answer as if that's what they're asking. And so my answer would be that I'll give the most basic answer, even though there's more nuance to it, which is that the
He says yes.
question, okay,
That's
I
what
think
he's
the
asking.
question is hopefully going to fade into the background. So, and maybe you will eventually sort of develop an answer, but I'll give you two examples. Let's say somebody is afraid they're a pedophile. What I would say to that person is you're never going to have a diploma on your wall that says certified not a pedophile. I don't, nobody has a diploma on their wall. Nobody has a, right. Nobody has 100% like, fine. And at the same time, if you let that question exist and just consistently refrain from engaging with it at all, it will just slowly fade into the background and take up progressively less space in your life until it's really not something you deal with. Does it exist? I mean, lots of things exist. Or similarly, like um, I was raised being very afraid of cancer because there was a lot of cancer in my family. I was not raised being afraid of neurodegenerative diseases, even because we didn't have that in the family, even though those are terrifying, right? Those are equally terrifying things. Or, I mean, not whatever, those are both terrifying things. I don't think about neurodegenerative diseases, right? And so they don't take up any space, even though they're scary. And I did think a lot about cancer. I still some well, no, I don't really think a lot about it anymore. I used to think a lot about cancer because that was something that I was scared of. To the extent that I stopped, worrying about it, doing things about it, trying to protect myself from it, it progressively took up less and less space. And now it's like the neurodegenerative disorders. Yeah, those are terrible, and cancer is terrible, but they're not things. They don't take up space anymore. Does that make sense? And another sort, I'm watching the time, so I'll be really brief. Another sort of example might be, let's say someone's afraid they're in the wrong relationship. Like as they get the rumination out of not that there is a right or wrong relationship, but they are conflicted about the relationship. As they get the rumination out of the picture and maybe do some other additional work on the relational and emotional dynamics that are informing the symptoms, like they might come to a place where they feel like they actually do have an answer, right? Where they're like, I
Correct.
really am happy in this relationship. So those are two sort of different paradigms, I think. I hope that answered the question.
Well, and I think, and I'll just comment, and I know we have to wrap up, but I think that's where, and I say this a lot in my own advocacy of, OCD isn't this monster that's descending on you, that's throwing like taboo shit at you. But in general, to be able to recognize when OCD is showing up for real event stuff, like in life, if I'm ruminating about my relationship, or if I'm ruminating, the key is not to, I've got to figure this out right now, the same way I needed to figure out if I was a pedophile. The key is, how can I reduce the compulsions enough that those aren't making me think that I have to find the answer today? Because the answer is not going to appear because of rumination, but the answer may appear later down the line once I can cut out all the shit.
In other words, once you can consistently eliminate the rumination, ironically, things tend to get a lot clearer.
Exactly.
Things tend to like clear up quite a bit. Like when people come in and they say like, my relationship is it's like I'm not sure I'm in the right relationship, but I'm also doing all these compulsive things and ruminating about it constantly. Again, not that I believe in a right or wrong relationship, but my first thought is you don't even know what it's like to be in this relationship without OCD. So first we have to
Mhm.
clear that up, and then let's see what this looks like.
Right.
You know, again, not that it's right, even though it's more complicated than that also. But yeah, okay.
All right. Well, we're at time, but thank you everybody for being here. This will be available on OCD Game Changers YouTube. And someone asked up above if you have any articles coming down the pipe.
So I just updated a bunch of stuff on the website, and specifically, I updated how to stop ruminating, and it has a lot more guidance than it used to, a lot more specifics of that exercise than it used to. And I added an article about attention versus awareness called "How to Stop Paying Attention," which is about sort of distinguishing between. It's specifically for sensory motor, but also other cases. So those are updated, and then I am going to be working on other things. Thanks slash articles.
Oh,
I'm gonna be working on other things. I'm working on like I'm always I don't write one article at a time. I sort of work on various different until one of them is ready to go. So I do have like 5 or 6 in the pipeline, but we'll see when they're born.
I spelled article wrong. There we go.
Okay, they'll find it. Articles.
Oh, all right. Just add an S.
All right, they'll figure it out. This is a smart bunch.
All right, I'm going to take it down. Well, thank you for being here as always.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
for
much.
the work that you do. Just so you know, if you have questions about what Michael's talking about, if you disagree with some of the things that Michael talks about,
Which is
I'm going to
honestly
say
totally
he
fine.
is open to
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah, I think
Email him.
people project some rigidity onto me. I'm actually very open-minded and open to evolving and changing, and like very interested in people's feedback. Like this is an evolving treatment. Like I can't think of 2 months that have gone by when it didn't change in a significant way. So yeah, I'm on a journey.
Yeah.
I'm not rigid about how I see things.
Well, I'm glad that you are on that journey and part of the OCD Game Changers family. And we appreciate you. And we also appreciate all of you that were here and also the OCD Game Changers retreat. Please, I emailed the survey. Please fill out the survey. We've got some giveaways that we're going to do this upcoming weekend. We also have the Pride Parade. By the way, Michael, I hope you can make it. I sent you an email. It's a virtual Pride Parade on Sunday. If you can come, it will be 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for about an hour and a half, celebrating, creating awareness, supporting our LGBTQ community with bringing awareness to OCD and mental health within that community. We are your allies, and you are part of our family as well. So again, Michael, thank you for being here, and we will set a time for Instagram to talk more about some of this stuff again. So if you follow me, I'm at Pure O Chrissy. Michael and I will hopefully start doing more videos on there. Yeah. So,
Thanks,
all
Christine.
right.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.